Awesome. And thank you. Yeah, I think, in a spirit of satsang and sort of this understanding that we're all, the guru lives inside of us all. And this is one of the things that we see perhaps in our non-ordinary states of consciousness, how connected we are to that which is primary. Listening to everybody's truth, I think, would be really very super powerful. So thanks for that idea. What I would love to do is perhaps start with some mantra, right?
Excellent.
And, as it's my understanding that Ram Dass asked that people do Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhiswaha for him on the event of his passing. And
is that right? He asked people to do that?
There is a woman I know named Amy, posted some of her conversations with him, and she asked him that. They were talking because he was very into destigmatizing death, right? And what did he say? That he wanted to change the way we relate to death or die trying.
That's good.
And so he was willing to talk about these things, knowing that he was going, right? He was in the book, they talk, hail the goer. He was aware that he was going, and, both spiritually and physically. And so I think he was willing to talk about that. And that was one of the things that he asked.
It's so fitting, I think, for someone like him to have an ending or a corporeal ending of this life, in that way, where he very clearly seemed to know. He very clearly reached out to everyone and had a fantastic death.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really happy about that. It's sad to lose him, of course, but he's never really lost. And he had I don't know. I can't think of somebody really in the present moment who has hit so many of the notes that I've in my own life tried to do. And so, everything from psychedelics to meditation to guru devotion and India and all of that, Buddhism, Hinduism, the way he combines the two, it's remarkable.
Right. Well, and sort of recognizing that that's all combined in the heart, right?
Yeah.
It's really interesting. You can make an amalgam in the mind if you want, and try to make all kinds of connections and create a system around it. But on the other hand, he was so willing to live in his heart, and so willing to be open and available and vulnerable to people and honest. And the sort of love that he cultivated, that perhaps was informed originally by a psychedelic experience, as happens for many of us. We have an experience that shows us what the potential is for the heart, and the potential is for our soul, and then to do a practice that continues to open it, right, and bring life to it, and purity, right, and brightness.
I think he's quintessentially American. The more I think about it, like, he really is. I think that's what I was sort of getting at, is that we haven't had, at least for me anyway, in my sort of spiritual horizon, like, there hasn't been a truly American guru like him.
Right. And I think it was in the book, he talks about him discussing LSD with Baba Hari Das. And Baba Hari Das says, oh, God just tricked his way into a material form, because all you Americans, all you want to do is eat and drink and shop. And so here's something that you can eat that shows you God. And, the path of that, is American. And things like Ram Dass and the Grateful Dead kind of make me proud to be an American, which is an interesting thing to say when there are obviously so many problems with America. But at the same time, there are beautiful things as well. And, you know, right at the top of that Christmas tree is, the, you know, perhaps the shining star of Ram Dass.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the things, and and then maybe I don't know when you want to do the mantra, you know,
At
just
the
tell
end
me
of
to shut up.
at the end of the paragraph that you're about to speak.
Well, now I forgot what I was going to say. So maybe we should just do the mantra.
All right, so let's all do 9 rounds of, and the mantra. I'm assuming that some of you might have your book. Why don't I just, so this is the mantra. And do you see that backwards or right side up? Is it flipped?
Oh, it's okay. It's good.
Okay. So that's the mantra. And I guess I'll just hold it up. And we'll do it 9 times. And then we'll do maybe 3 rounds of alternate nostril breathing. You know, in the cookbook for a sacred life, he talks about purification. He has a variation of this. And so that'll be, and then we'll riff some more on the book, and we'll see what other people have to say as well. So let's let the spine be tall. And take a breath or two. Gate, gate, pada sam gate, bodhi swaha. 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 Gate, pada sam gate, bodhi swaha. So alternate nostril breathing, right? Take your right hand, fold your 2 fingers in. The thumb goes on the lip of the right nostril, the little 2 fingers go on the left. We'll start with left. So close off the right nostril and inhale through the left. Breathing that air and energy into the heart. And then closing it off, breathing out through the right nostril, exhaling all the purities of thought, word, and deed, all negative thoughts and emotions. Inhale through the right. Breathing it into the heart, exhaling out of the left, exhaling impurities of thought, word, and deed. Inhaling through the left. Breathing light, love, energy into the heart, exhaling impurities out through the right nostril. In through the right. And out through the left. One more round in through the left. Out through the right. In through the right. And out through the left. And just take a breath or two to see what that feels like. See if you feel a little bit more tuned in. Centered and calmed, as the book recommends. Always centering, always calming, something like that. And so, Doc, I'm curious if there's anything special in the book that pops out at you in this moment.
If there's anything that pops out at me?
Yeah,
What's
what's alive for you? What is speaking to you through this sacred text in this moment?
Yeah, I was trying to find it. I was having trouble. I found it last night, and then I was having trouble finding it just now.
You know, I gotta tell you, there are things that I swear are in this book that I have read that I can't find now.
Right?
Like there's a never-ending story quality to it where things pop up and then they're gone.
Well, while I look for it, I will tell you one thing that I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, which is the first time I saw this book. And, you know, I did not know, I had no preconceived notions of the book. I didn't know who Ram Dass was. I was a little boy. And it was actually Christmas. Oh my God, I'm remembering this now. It was
It's
Christmas.
your anniversary of Be Here Now.
Yeah, I just realized that because we were in Boston, which is where my extended family's from, and I was bored, and we had done, it was either before Presents or like way after, you know, but I was done with Presents, and I was looking through my auntie's bookshelves, and I came across this book, and I was just like, wow, look at this. This isn't like the other books. What's this book? And I was just a little kid looking at the pictures, you know, and I don't recall having, you know, anything specific other than the fact that I knew this book was different from other books. And it was something I spent a lot of time with because I felt like I could understand it through the pictures, you know, and I don't know what I understood, but my aunt, she's a Buddhist, and this was a book that sort of got her on the path, and I think that was very similar to my encounter. You know, it got me thinking on a different wavelength as a kid.
Right, there's something that's really right-brained about it. You know, there's almost just a tarot card quality to it, perhaps, right, where you're really invited to kind of unfold parts of your mind that don't ordinarily get used, right?
Subconscious. Well, I think it's tapping into the, you know, your soul.
Right, it's really inviting you to kind of open, and there are these, you know, funny little jokes and you know, sly comments that sort of shock you out of ordinary reality a little bit. You know, where he says, you know, he talks about death and in some ways spiritual death, and you know, if you want to become enlightened, you don't get to go, right? It's like everything that you think is you gets extinguished. You will be utterly, completely destroyed. And then he says, we're looking for volunteers.
That's the one I like. That's the one I'm looking for. The volunteers one.
We want volunteers. It's right at the bottom of the Gate page. Page 8.
No, I don't think that's the one I'm looking for then.
Pretty fierce journey, pretty fierce requirements. We want volunteers.
All right, maybe that is what I was looking for. Let's see.
And so what I like about the idea of Hail the Goer.
Hail the Goer.
Is that Hail the Goer is that he talks so much, there's this non-dual this conversation about the non-dual and about all of the things that we think of ourselves as the ego and all of the ways that we identify, and that we're so stuck in that, and that sort of the best thing that we can identify it as is somebody who's going for it, because so much of our identification and activity is wrapped up in maintaining the ego. So to shift the identity, you know, shift the activity from being somebody who's maintaining the ego to somebody who's trying to actively dismantle the ego is something that is praiseworthy. you know, to sort of have that bodhi, the bodhicitta, that bodhi quality.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, I mean, and you know, that's nothing new. You know, like that's something you can find. I mean, not to say that this presentation isn't unique, but those ideas are not novel ones. They're ones that you can find in any, you know, self-help book. But I think, you know, obviously the way they're packaged here is really different, right? Like he's working on like an artistic level here that I think really does speak to the subconscious. You know, when I think about my childhood looking at this, like in a way, like it was a child's mind that he was approaching through pictures, because it was, you know, it resonates with the subconscious. It resonates with archetypes and like non-linguistic understanding.
Right.
But what also comes to mind is the fact that, you know, Ram Dass like admitted, you know, that he hadn't really achieved all these things, right? That, you know, when he had his stroke, that was the big sort of, that, you know, he really encountered his ego in ways that he hadn't before. And so I think in that way, like that kind of honesty, what you were saying before, is so exhilarating for us, because it gives us a sense of like how big the mountain is and how hard the climb is.
Right. And I find that I almost feel like I can tell so much. I really appreciate the human teachers that are willing to talk about their failings and their foibles. And, you know, from time to time we come across people who want to pretend that their shit doesn't stink.
Right.
Right. And they kind of want to look at you with like these glowing eyes, like they understand everything. It's like, you don't understand everything. You're just you're a mess too. And I want to hear about how people wrestle with the mess. You know, I was like, I love the Kobe story when they're like trying to figure out how to get to the grocery store with a crying child.
Yeah.
Kobe doesn't like that. She cries louder. And and sort of what he said, if you get so efficient that you have to turn off all the vibrations of the scene because you're too busy about the past or the future, it costs too much.
Yeah.
And so we're looking really at a book, but again, like you're saying, you're looking at a book by ordinary metrics is inefficient. Mm. Right? We're not looking at an efficient book at all, where it's just they had to, you know, it's square. It's almost like a rock and roll album.
Mm.
You know, it's square. It's got all of these weird sections with different paper. It was probably a hassle to make. You know, I don't think that they charge a lot of money for it. They would charge, you know, I think it operated at a loss for a little bit or something like that. So it's inefficient, but it's got the vibrations of the scene.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is, you know, it reminds me in many ways like of the kind of poetry that Anne Waldman does, you know, where it is like a music album. It's something you have to, you know, you can't really understand Anne Waldman until you hear her and see her and experience her. And I feel like this book has to be read out loud. You know, we're talking about the pictures and how the pictures sort of resonate on a subconscious level, but at the same time, like this book, when you read it out loud and you pay attention to like the different size letters and, you know, the pauses and the way it's organized, like it does, like the pictures kind of seep in under a, you know, in a much more emotional, non-linguistic level. This wasn't the page I was looking for, but I love it. It's the Making It Sacred.
Great. What page number is that?
54.
And when you were saying that, what I was thinking is that it almost asks you to not just read it, but to almost perform it.
That's right. That's what I'm getting at. And I think that's why I picked on this page too, is Making It Sacred. This chopping wood and carrying water is karma yoga. The yoga of daily life. The way to do it is do what you do, but dedicate the fruits of the work to me. That's the most esoteric way of saying it. Another way of saying it is do it without attachment. Another way of saying it is total renunciation. You know.
Now wait. I mean, can I ask something of you?
Yeah.
Will you read it again but perform it?
Oh yeah, sure.
Because what you're going to do is you're going to set the stage for other people, you know, people who are here in the satsang to perform it as well, to perform their parts.
All right. Well, we happen to pick one with a lot of text. Maybe I'll just do the first bit here. So, making it sacred. This chopping wood and carrying water is karma yoga, the yoga of daily life. The way to do it is do what you do, but dedicate the fruits of the work to me. That's the most esoteric way of saying it. Another way of saying it is do it without attachment. Another way of saying it is total renunciation. That awesome. Is so different when you do that. And I tell my students this all the time. It's like, and maybe even Kelley can speak to this because he's an actor or was an actor, and he was part of the drama class at Naropa. But like, you know, the challenge that I just experienced, you know, I'm not an actor. I'm not, you know, I get in front of a bunch of kids in a classroom and, you know, I have a little bit of confidence from that, but like, there is a kind of Rubicon you have to cross when you do anything performative that I think is intimately connected to egoism. And so in giving life, in making it sacred, you're performing it, and at the same time, I think transcending some kind of attachment to your identity, some kind of, you know, inhibition around performing. I don't know, what do you think, Kelley? This is my friend Kelley. I introduced him before.
Hi, Kelley.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. You want to weigh in on any of this?
Well, let me get, I was doing something so weird. What did you just say about acting, Chris?
So we're talking about is performing Ram Dass's book, Be Here and Now. And what happens when you take the stage and you have that strong inhibition.
Well, I taught a class through, years ago, we tried to start Naropa East in New York City. This is quite a while ago. And at that time, I was in the corporate world and I was making a lot of money. And I gave them seed money to get it going. So part of that deal was I got to teach this class. It was an acting class. And it was like the first class that was going to be done through Naropa East. And it basically dealt with the issue of self-consciousness. And we were going to explore the question of why, when you stand in front of a group of people, does your heart start to beat faster? Why do your palms start sweating? Why does your mouth dry out? What's really going on here? So we're going to explore that. And it's amazing. Like, I asked people to go up and talk about their own life for 2 minutes at the beginning, and I would say over 50% of the people just went, that's it. That's all they could do.
So did you come to any conclusions, though? I mean, were there conclusions?
Yeah, everybody overcame those limitations in the process that I learned through theater and spiritual practices and yoga. In the theater, one of the ways we relate to the state, we call it the empty space, right? Mm-hmm. So intrinsically right there, right off the bat, empty, we're in spiritual realm, emptiness. And not only that, so that's external emptiness. That's something you're going into an environment where there's, you know, you walk on the stage, there's nobody there except you, it's empty. But we also have the ability to create an inner emptiness through deep relaxation, meditation. We would call that state of mind in theater going to zero or being at neutral. So I was teaching how to bring zero inside into the empty space, which is outside, and exploring that through exercises. And people who wanted to sing, but they never could, you know, because they were too afraid, at the end of this class were able to do it in front of an audience and did it pretty good. So it's just a matter of, I don't know if you've read the book, The Artist's Way.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, well, one of those teachings is get the fuck out of your own way. right? You're in the way. Your trip, right? Your fear is blocking that energy. So it was dealing with that kind of stuff. I still have my notes. I still have my notes on it. I have to go look at it again.
Right. So yeah, we're in our own way. That's the conclusion.
But you could do that. Yeah, as you were talking, as you said, you know, you could probably create a piece around this book.
Right.
What we would call a piece. You'd get a group of people together, and we'd explore the material.
Okay.
We could perform.
For example, but you have
we
to
could do that right now.
Yeah, but hold on.
Yeah. This is the piece.
And the approach. Here's the thing. In experimental theater, you know, you're giving, you know, you have text, right? So that you're giving text, but you need to explore the text because there's meanings there that you don't know yet. If you go right at the top of your head, you'll probably do the most obvious thing, but it's much deeper stuff in language that's through. There's an exercise called the deliberation exercises, which is totally geared to explore text in the empty space. And it's a very simple exercise. And I did a production of Waiting for Godot in Boulder, Colorado, which was sponsored by the Boulder Public Library. And we did a production of Endgame by Samuel Beckett as well, which was on PBS there. And we worked on the Waiting for Godot script totally through the deliberation exercise. And I was playing the character Potts.
The deliberation exercise is Joachim Trimpa's thing?
No, this comes from experimental theater here in New York City.
Right.
And Joe Shankin, famous people like that. And so as we're getting along, you know, we're doing this over here. And I've worked with other guys who we never memorized our lines. They didn't want us to memorize our lines because that would be rote. You would end up with a rote response. So we held our scripts right up until the last week, and through your unconscious and repetition of doing it, you start picking it up. So, so doing this deliberation exercise thing, as we're getting like a week before we're going to open, and I'm playing this character Pazzo, and we did this bizarro interpretation, and he was like a rock star. I wore a gold suit with wild shit. But as we're doing a rehearsal one day, all of a sudden, I went in, because of the repetition and how this approaches, I went into a fucking altered state and created the character that was so hilarious that the director fell out of his fucking seat. And everyone was cracking up and going nuts. And then in my mind, I started to observe that they were doing that. And as soon as that happened, I lost it.
Right.
You know, I lost it. So, but we discovered the character in those moments before that. And we went back to that and worked with it. And that became hilarious interpretation. But it came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Like my first teacher in theater was Lee Worley. She started the theater program at Naropa. We were invited to this theater conference in 1974. And at the end of it, we had to give we had to give a performance for Trungpa Rinpoche. And there was a piece of literature given out at the time called Report from Outside the Closet. It was about self-consciousness, about somebody going in the closet. And we gave 5 interpretations, and the last one was spontaneous. She got the job because of that. And
that's fascinating.
And she wrote a book called Comes From Nowhere. So that's what I'm into right now. I paint now, and everything for me comes from nowhere.
So can you tie everything? So I feel like we could have a whole other thing just about these stories because it's really ripe. There's really a lot there. Can you tie it all back to Ram Dass?
Yeah, okay.
Probably. But we'd have to get together and work on it. We'd have to pick out which parts do we want to do. Which parts do we want to use?
Well, I just mean in this moment. Can you just kind of like, you know, give it like wrap? Well, this is a whole like be here now Ram Dass celebration. Like just put a little Ram Dass bow on everything you just said.
I might be able to do that.
Well, Ram Dass, I mean, for me, that book changed everything, man. Mm-hmm. That book was like the rocket ship that blasted us off into the real spiritual aspect of the late 60s. And when I first read it, I've been brought up Catholic. I mean, I've had, through acid, I had a lot of what I considered spiritual experiences. But when I read that book, it opened up like perceptions and doors of that I never knew about before. So it was a mind expansion book.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Pleasure
Yeah.
meeting you. What a great way to meet somebody.
Indeed. To be continued.
I hope I wasn't
Awesome. Very, very cool.
So I think what Killian was getting at, at least what I heard, was what we were talking about before, which is that aspect of performing unlocks meaning. And
Yes.
and when you do it in this way that Killian was describing, where I forget how he said it, like drawing from nothingness or whatever, it's like, you're bypassing egoism, and there's a kind of openness. I don't know what the metaphor is, but you become a conduit in my mind. You're channeling something rather than, self-consciously manufacturing or putting on, or as Ram Dass and Leary would say, like, playing that game.
Yeah, indeed. Well said. So would anybody like to perform a page from Be Here Now?
As a spiritual practice.
As a spiritual practice.
Of getting over your egoism. So it's not egoism to do it. I think that's the problem we have as Americans.
Well, not only
we
is it
think
not
it's like,
egoism. Oh, go ahead.
We think of acting, we think of like holding a mic and like talking. It's like we shouldn't be doing that because that's egoistic. It's all about us. I'm talking too much. I've got the floor. But in this case, it's very much about something other than that.
Well, what I want people to come forward and do it as, if might be so bold, if it matters what I want, as a devotional act,
yeah.
to honor the man and his teachings. So, even if you are shy to perform, this reminds me of a story of Bhagavan Das once told me, who is another devote. He's featured in this book. He was performing.
Picture.
He was performing, and the time slot that they gave him happened to coincide with lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's on stage, and people are in line holding trays, waiting to get their food, and they're not really paying attention to him, and he's not getting attention necessarily. And one of the people in his band said, "Baba, we're singing to a lunch line." And he responded, "We're singing to God." And so
making it sacred, which kirtan almost pretty much inherently is. So I would like to invite somebody who would like to express their devotion, or practice coming into their heart and speaking from their heart, using the words of this book to give that a shot. And I see that Deborah has written page 53. Deborah, do you want to go ahead? Cricket. I think her mic might be off. Oh, there you go.
I turned your mic on, Deborah.
Looks.
Oh, I'm still here, but I was actually looking at something else that I really, really love. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, good. But I love that you said 54 too, Doc, because
Oh, yeah.
I did love 53. And it's really similar. It really is, it really is about chopping wood and carrying water. That's where 53 ends. So.
Yeah, I see it now.
And your friend was wonderful too. But I also really like, where was the one I like? Where, and I got this book 40 years ago. This is my second book, because the first one I lost in the flood. But I actually have this is the newer one, but it's the same, same book. But I got this book, it was a gift from a friend of mine. So, and I remember, much like your experience, just being intrigued by the shape and the pictures.
Yeah.
And just, and feeling like one thing contradicted the next thing, but felt like it was like the same thing, and wondered like what that meant. Like, where was my journey going to take me? You know, how much did I see that was real? How much did I see that was unreal? How much wasn't I seeing? So, and it's been, you know, lots of years and lots of years and lots of practice. Let me just say that. So, I like the one about, I'm going to find the one I really love. Hold on. I like the one with the chicken, but I also like the fact that he has so many things with butterflies and transformation. Like, for me, that was really good. But hold on a second. There's one. Must be further back. I don't know. In the 70s, maybe somewhere.
I think the pages skip around on purpose. They elude you. It's like a magic book.
I found
I think I'm getting closer. Nothing to do. There is nowhere to go, and there is nothing to do. On page 82.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to keep coming to know one another more and more, free of being identified with any veil. We're going to see more and more of other beings, less identified with their veils. As you find the light in you, you begin to see the light in everyone else. As you find God in yourself, there's God everywhere. Such a simple, obvious sequence of stuff to do. Somebody says, oh, I try meditating and I can't. I'm afraid I'm not ready and I've got to go. Great, sure, man, go ahead, of course. What else is there to do? Go back into the world, it's called. It's a good step. And I love this part because it's right. Of course, Grateful Dead. Am I going backward or forward? I can't do either of them. Can't go backward and I can't go forward and I can't stand still.
Yeah.
And all of it's irrelevant. And one of my very favorite songs is The Wheel.
Yeah.
For that reason. So, I'm a big time Deadhead. So,
yeah.
Since I was a kid. So this is
they're kind of,
yeah, this book just goes so together, and Ram Dass's love for Seva and all those things that he had done, and even saying that tripping wasn't always the answer. That like, what do we do in between the tripping is really the answer. So that was really good.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate, like, that one's tricky because it's all outlined. Like, that one's not easy to read.
Yeah, it's a good one. I like that one a lot.
So I like page 88. Well, does anybody have any other thoughts? Well, before I do that, like, does anybody have any reflections on Deborah's reading? I mean, I do think that it's an amazing antidote. It's such
what, Daniel, I wanted to interject something too, which is because I run into this so frequently with people saying that they want to meditate or they try to meditate, and I always just ask people to meditate for 5 minutes. Just do it for 5 minutes.
Right.
Just do it 5 minutes before you get out of bed. Just do it 5 minutes before you get to sleep. That it starts with that 5 minutes, and then and then it gets easier, and then it becomes 10 minutes, and then it gets easier. So, but it's that looking at how vast it is between where you are now and where you want to go, that holds people back. But of course, every step, even the baby step, will get you up Mount Everest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also, like, the trying to meditate, the page 82 kind of takes the wind out of the sails of trying to meditate. There's nowhere to go, there's nothing to do. There's nowhere to go, there's nothing to do. Mm-hmm. It's like, what is a practice of just ceasing ordinary activity like? Mm. Right? If we're like so busy, and again, it goes back to, like, if we've got to be so efficient that we forget about the vibes, we've lost it. As opposed to
get in alignment and then
get in alignment, and then the doer and the goer, is perhaps doing whatever the doer and the goer might do, but we're this goddess here on this page with her arms spread, going nowhere, doing nothing.
Yeah. That without the thought, you're just making up for it with action.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Who wants to go next? Somebody's gotta, there's somebody out there. I feel like I'm like a faith healer now. There's somebody out here within the sound of my voice.
Can I have a witness?
That desperately wants to share, but they're afraid to share.
We're talking to you.
Talking to you. Put down your fear. All right, in the meantime, Killian talked about empty space, and there's the Grateful Dead quote, just filling up space. The bass player, his name was Phil. So here, I'll just fill up some space. This is 89.
Oh, there's a reference to Phil?
No, Killian said empty space.
Oh, empty space, yeah.
Empty space, and it made me think of just filling up space and how music starts with silence. And this is fun because it's round. And when I looked at it and thought about the performance aspect of it, I realized I was in this chair that spins. So it's sort of like my thinking mind is a perfect servant and a lousy master. I'm watching he who speaks. I am watching he who listens. The entire process from this place inside is always calm. A place in which the flame never flickers. And as I learn to live inside this eternally calm place, it gets deeper and deeper and calmer and wiser and lighter and lighter. And I am more love, and I become more and more like the sun. And I am more love, and I become more and more like the sun. That was pretty fun.
Yeah.
And the thing is that I don't even remember what I just read.
Do you feel it though?
Yes, I feel it though. I feel more and more like the sun.
Yeah.
So whose turn?
Okay, I'm gonna interject too.
Okay.
Since I feel like I'm so happy to be talking to you today. That's why these pictures are so fabulous in here. Because, if you can't get there one way, you're going to get there another way.
Yeah, right.
And the pictures are so inspirational. They really have you thinking, and they have, they're so experiential. I'm just kind of flipping through here and looking at the Magic Theater page. For Mad Men Only, price of admission, your mind on 102. Always there. Yeah, what can you see it? The next message is where you are when you hear the next message. Wherever you're ready, you'll hear the next message. Whenever. The interesting thing is there's always a next message, and it's always available to you now. But if you're not ready, you're not going.
That's a great page.
Yeah, it's a great page. It's a great book. I'm so glad you're doing this today. It's feeling wonderful.
I mean, in a way, I feel like the words here are, it's like spiritual punk, like the words are secondary to everything, like sometimes you can't even make out the letters because the picture is dominating, so it really is, to my eyes, like working on a deep subjective non-linguistic level, even though it's using words, but it's using words in the same way that, like, I think ancient Buddhists used to use Sanskrit, or like in the sense that if you think of ancient Sanskrit in India being the sort of language of Hinduism and having this, inherent sacredness associated with Hinduism, the Buddhists come along and they kind of punk Sanskrit, because they're not Hindus and they don't, they don't instill that kind of intrinsic nature to language. And so there's a kind of deflationary aspect to like Buddhist Sanskrit, like they're punking like the Hindus. And I feel like, Baba Ram Dass is kind of doing the same thing here, and he's bringing in all this like, non-normal ways of communicating, ways that kind of punk the language or punk the whole idea of conveying logos. We're such a logos-centric culture where everything is the word, everything's black and white, and this is anything but black and white, and the words are secondary.
Right. Well, so often we're using language to describe what is not true in an absolute sense. We're talking, we spend a lot of time talking to what we're not and who we aren't. Like we spend a lot of time enabling each other's facades and describing that which is kind of fake and preconceived and constructed. We spend a lot of time propping up each other's construction sites.
Yeah, that's good.
So what we have here, and sometimes we even talk to who we're not about what we are, right? Like it's like Dan's ego and Doc's ego discussing the absolute. And what we have here, perhaps, is what I think you're saying in some ways, is that he's talking to who we are, right? So sort of, it doesn't necessarily make sense to who we're not, because who we're not can't even understand it. We can't grasp it.
Ooh,
But
that was
the truth of our being receives it, and then it permeates. It's sort of like butter on an English muffin of our being.
That's good. And then the back of the book, which is like his cookbook, like it's taking every kind of belief and synthesizing this, everything from Jesus to Bob Dylan, everything from, and everything in between.
Yeah, that's where he really operationalizes it in a much more Western conventional sense. So it's like,
right.
If we're thinking Grateful Dead, actually, and you're looking at the copy I have, right, which is the copy I grew up with, which has the long conventional introduction with this space in between, right? It's kind of like a Dead show, right? Like you got, first set, you got space, and then you got your second set.
It's good to be on here with so many Deadheads. I'm loving this.
Well, this was my first, before I knew about the word integration, this is what I had.
Yeah, the cookbook.
Like an old head saw that I was getting a little weird, and he said, you do this, read this, you'll feel better.
Yeah.
And so these practices taught me how to stabilize my experience in my body, right? Because he talks so much in the brown pages about the experience of the non-dual, the universal, like the whole universe rushing into my head as a kid. And then what do we do with that, and how do we ground it? How do we actually create the change that we saw? We had a vision of change. We had a vision of a better reality, perhaps a more heart-centered and caring and connected reality. But that didn't dispel the immense amount of like darkness and confusion that was still there, and that had to be worked on. And I think that's what the cookbook does. It helps me work on my darkness to purify my heart and calm my mind.
Yeah, and it's also a bit of like, doing the dishes in a way. It's like the brown pages are very romantic, and they're very like, seeker-ish, like they're all about transcendence and or non-transcendence, but there's mysticism permeating every page. And to me, that's romantic. And it's not like doing the dishes, but you eventually have to do the dishes after the party. Right. So, doing the dishes is your integration, and you know, it's really important, and it's quite frankly, it's unusual, I think, for his era, for them to be so responsible about that, you know, and to include, you know, not just you know, a token sort of nod to integration, but something that's actually operational that you can do by yourself, and you know, potentially save yourself some real trauma.
Right. And it covers so many aspects of one's life, and also is not, you know, in his way, it's not particularly heavy-handed. You know, try some of this, try
Right.
some of this. If this works, try that. And making it really accessible and practical for people. Like you were saying, I like operationalized is really nice, and also sort of showing us, you know, one of the things he says is sadhana. You know, it's like we first we do the sadhana, and then hopefully that starts to expand, and then everything that we are doing is sadhana, and then that's spiritual practice, you know, if you're not familiar with that term.
Sadhana is amazing. I mean, just the concept of sadhana. I mean, it's very connected to the passage I read, in the sense that, you know, for me, sadhana is everything. You know, it's making, you know, it is bringing the sacred into the mundane, or it's the conflation of the sacred and the profane, in that it's a way of structuring your reality so that everything you're doing is part of that narrative of quest, you know. So you could think of sadhana very literally as, like, you know, the step-by-step spiritual practice that you do when you sit on the cushion. Or you could open that up and think of this book as sadhana. You know, you could think of your day as sadhana, and it's just bringing that kind of intentionality, that kind of, you know, you're making it sacred. Like, you're taking what I started with, you're taking, you know, your everyday normal existence, and you're putting it into this context of achieving spiritual accomplishments.
Right. You know, it's said, you know, in the Yoga Sutras, that when we do practice regularly over a long period of time with the proper attitude, it bears fruit. And that last part is almost the hardest, with the proper attitude. And the middle of the book kind of tunes us into the attitude. You know, it brings us, you know, the book opens up with like a huge heart chakra. You know, it talks about, you know, opening and surrendering to the energy of the heart and allowing that to permeate us. And then it's like, okay, cool. So we've tuned you up, like, now function. You know, and it's like, now do a little of this, and now do a little of that, and see. And again, back to, if you start to get so efficient and too busy that you have to forget about the vibe. And so it's like, what are activities that we can do with an open heart? And how do we practice? He also uses the term unbearable compassion. He uses it a lot, unbearable compassion, unbearable compassion. And it's like, what do ordinary activities done with unbearable compassion look like? And what does it require of us to maintain the vibration of unbearable compassion in our everyday life? And then how do these simple prescribed activities in the back of the book help to ground that into our body for the more complicated situations that we come in contact with as householders? Because none of us are monks, I don't think. I don't think there's a monk on this call.
No monk.
No monk.
No, but there are parents here, right? And on 45, talking about how to really do this right, and how you have to be working on yourself, not working from the external. It's not about being, it's not about doing all these things for your kid. It's about doing the right things to get yourself in that place. So I'm just so, I'm really so into my book in this moment right now. I'm just grieving on this. It's really been a while. And There's so many wonderful things in here you're mentioning. When you were just talking about the last thing, it flipped the page, and that's how I saw that one. I forgot about that, from 44 to 45. And I was like, oh yeah, really, right.
Yeah, I mean, it's all here. It's like every tantra's in here, you know, avant-garde art, poetry, Tibetan Buddhism, Hinduism, hippieism, like the Grateful Dead. I mean, it's such
Sufi Sam. There's a shout out to Sufi Sam.
Sufi Sam.
Right. For those of you who are, there was, you know, like kind of like Ram Dass was the Jewish guy that became sort of the Hindu weirdo. You know, the acid drizzle Hindu practitioner. Sufi Sam was that for Sufism, and he has a center in the mission. He passed away, and he would, you know, did a lot of dancing and spinning, and he was a brilliant spiritual teacher as well. And there's even a shout out to him, I think, around dance, on the dance section. I'm sorry, did I interrupt you? You were saying something, and I got excited by Sam.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Would anybody like to read anything more? I feel like there must be somebody who'd like to pay homage. Favorite brown pages?
Favorite brown pages, even if somebody has done some of the practices in the back and have found it useful. I know that you know, some of my first mantra work were mantras out of this book. You know, I was doing, I learned Om Mani Padme out of this book. I learned Padma Sambhava Guru out of this book, Guru Mantra out of this book, and I did them a lot. You know, I remember reading him talk about how he was doing Om Mani Padme Hum. I think this is in The Only Dance There Is. He said, I was doing Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum all day long, every day. And it was really, you know, doing good things for my head. And one day I woke up in my New York City apartment, and all I could hear around me in all directions, just vibrating, everything was Om Mani Padme Hum. And I was like, oh my God, I did it. I broke through. Everything I see and hear is Om Mani Padme Hum. And this crazy vibration. And as he started to wake up more, he realized that Om Mani Padme Hum was coming from outside his window. And he looked outside, and it was a jackhammer.
Oh, wow.
And he had just, you know, gotten it so into his bones that it was overlaying onto everything that he was coming in contact with. And, you know, he goes on to talk about, you know, just Shakti, just how energy and prana moves, and that there isn't necessarily an inherent positivity or negativity or secularness or sacredness to energy, that it's all energy of the goddess and the mother in the universe. And so I was like, okay, sign me up. I'm going to do Om Mani Padme Hum for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, mantras like that.
Mantras like that sometimes.
But it's true. I mean, that's what, you know, that's how we think of meditation in Tibetan Buddhism is, you know, it's habituation, right? So the more you habituate your consciousness to a certain frequency, the more you're going to be on that frequency. And so, you know, you're achieving that by engaging in this book, I think.
Right. Yeah, there's so much talk these days about the default mode network.
Yeah.
And everybody wants to get out of their default mode network, which I'm not sure is a good idea long-term on a regular basis. You know, it's my sense that I would prefer to just tune my default mode network to love, compassion, creativity, good humor, kindness. Did I say creativity yet?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, well, there you go. That one too. You know what I mean? It's like being that we are bumbling around on this plane for a while in these bodies and in these personalities for a while. It's like, how do we tune the personality to just be like, you know, what do they say? The person our dog thinks we are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like while we're here, how do we be that best version of ourselves?
Yeah.
You know, where we are, you know, if we look at Ram Dass, where we are just touching everybody we meet with such unbearable compassion that we leave just a legacy of love behind us.
Mm-hmm.
Just of loving presence, you know, to everybody we meet.
Yeah, that default mode network is interesting. It's funny. What made you bring that up? Is it just because it's so popular now with Michael Pollan's book and all that, or?
Well, you were talking about habituation.
Right. So that triggered it.
And you were talking about habituation, and this is sort of, you know, this is Tam Integration meets Psychedelic Sangha, and people throw it around a lot. You know, I might have talked to somebody a day or two ago who was like, "Oh, my default mode network," and you know, I'm not even convinced anybody even is using it right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like it sort of is the latest neologism, you know, but it's an age old sort of idea, and maybe, you know, it's something similar to what Aldous Huxley was talking about with the doors of perception when he used that, you know, metaphor of the water gauge, you know, so that, you know, your mind is normally kind of narrow and closed. The doors of perception are closed. And then, you know, you take a psychedelic and suddenly they're open. And for Huxley, it was like, that was the really real, you know, in the same way we talk about the default mode network sort of not being, you know, or dropping the default mode network as being a good thing, you know, similarly, like opening up the doors of perception is a good thing. But Huxley also said you can't walk around like that all the time. Like, that's just not practical. So then the question is, you know, well, how do we close the doors without going back to that same old person that we were? And obviously, you know, so we've disrupted the default mode network with the brown pages. But then how do we avoid becoming really something worse, not just our old selves, but something worse? And they talk about that. I was trying to find it in here, you know, that page where...
Well, he talked about it in drugs. You can become very disturbed and depressed if you just keep doing the drugs without the integration, without doing the practices.
True enough. And I'm not even speaking specifically, I'm just using, you know, Huxley as a kind of an analogy, but I think, you know, that there's a page here, I'm trying to find it, where they talk about, you know, becoming Jesus. And there's this one, it's the Madman page, I think, right? What page was that?
I don't know.
No, it's not the Madman page.
Well, that's where, again, the ego kind of pops its head in, right? But yeah, I'm not sure what page you're talking about.
I'll see if I can find it. But it's this, it's a bit of a story about two guys, and they both think they're Jesus. But then one is able to recognize the God in the other person, but the other guy's like, no, I'm Jesus, you know?
Right, it's only a problem if you think you're the only one.
Right. And I think that is what happens. And this goes back to the default mode network. This is the danger, is that, like, once you know, open the doors of perception, once you know, drop the default mode network, whatever your vocabulary is for this, I think there is this sort of danger in that you if you don't integrate, if you don't habituate, if you don't meditate, like, you're not only going to go back to, you risk not only going back to the same old schmuck you were, but you could be delusional, and you could think you're Christ who, you know, is going to save everybody, whether they, you know, like it or not. And that usually doesn't work out for anyone.
Right. Which it could quite possibly, lead you to hurting people.
That's exactly right.
Which is sort of why, and we skip over it, you know, sometimes because we all think we're so advanced. And, you know, we live in a postmodern age. It sort of seems why the yogis, the practitioners, had moral precepts. You know, not to be too heavy-handed, but, you know, not lying, cheating, and stealing is a practical, you know, it's not even, it doesn't have to be moral or virtual signaling. It's just, if you're in a weird, confused, expanded place where anything is possible and everything is irrelevant because it's all one and all God, it's like you should probably stick close to not lying, cheating, stealing, sexually abusing people and things of that nature, because it creates I'm trying to stay away from moral language. It creates ripples in the space-time continuum that are going to bounce back in ways that are probably going to be unpleasant. It's going to be generally agreed upon that you're a nuisance and must be stopped.
Yeah.
Damla says stealing makes Jesus cry.
So, what is that?
Damla, we have a comment. Hi, Damla. Good to see you here. Stealing makes Jesus cry. So yeah, just a little note on moral precepts. I also want to say that, Ram Dass was very clear that this book was an embodiment, was a manifestation of Maharaji's grace. I want to give a nod to, Ram Dass had a spiritual master, and who is considered to be an incarnation of Hanuman. I'm wearing my Balinese Hanuman shirt. But sort of having something that is greater than ourself, and it's, the guru presence is a presence that, it exists in all of us, and he managed to find it in a human form. Many of us don't find it in human form. And, I think in 2020, we are finding that modern guru yoga as it's seen today, it's potentially problematic. Right? There's been a lot.
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
Modern guru yoga, as it's practiced in America, has a tendency to be problematic.
Yeah.
The Me Too movement extends, outside of Hollywood and outside of, right into ashrams and spiritual centers and yoga teachers all around the world. And so, whereas the book heavily talks so much about, the perfection of masters, and the idea of surrendering to a guru. There's also in 2020, I'm not sure how to say this. Do you see what I'm getting at? It's like, there's an interesting problem because there's so much abuse rampant.
Yeah.
And
well, I think you're right.
And so how do we stay tuned into our own hearts and trust ourselves in one way, while also moving beyond that rational faculty? There's this really delicate dance that is required to have discrimination of what is pure and good.
Yeah.
And finding that which is pure and good for opening, expanding our hearts and calming our minds.
Yeah, it's an interesting, we're talking about somebody who really ushered in a huge paradigm shift, right? The counterculture forever changed the face of America. And with that counterculture, we had an influx of gurus for the first time. We had Vivekananda here, pretty early, but we didn't have this mass, immigration laws changed in the 60s, and we had more gurus coming, more Indian nationals coming than ever before. And we had that correlated with this, emergence of a mainstream counterculture that was keen to assimilate the guru-disciple relationship. And so I guess what I'm getting at is, like, as a academic, like, it's hard not to see this in the context of like 100 years, not just one lifetime. So it's like, this very much represents like our first exposure, at least to, not our first exposure, but our first assimilation of, one of our first assimilations of what the guru is. And we're still digesting, we're still assimilating. And I think we are in a stage right now where you would never see a book like this take off, like all my students, everybody I know has a real skepticism and fear of gurus. And I think in many ways that's a positive step in the sense that we are being discriminating, but it is in the context of, say, 100 years, where maybe we're going to, you know, find things shifting, finding more balance, you know, so that it's, you know, the future is maybe somewhere, the future of our sort of the American gurus, somewhere in between what it was in the 60s, and in terms of no skepticism, no discrimination, and now where there's maybe sort of like too much skepticism, or I wouldn't say too much, but a kind of necessary skepticism to get us to some other place. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's a process, and we have not fully assimilated, I think, the guru into our culture yet. We don't, you know, we're still figuring that person out. And I didn't mean to call him a him. They, you know, they're gurus, everyone.
Right. It does seem to be useful. One of the quotes that comes to my mind that I really loved is Ramana Maharshi is a great spiritual master. And his teaching, I can't recommend his teachings enough if you get a chance to read some Ramana Maharshi or learn about him. Somebody came to him once and said, "I want you to be my guru." And Ramana Maharshi said, "I want you to meditate and seek the guru inside yourself."
Yeah.
And he said, "No, I want you to be my guru." And Ramana said, "Look, bro, the outer guru is telling you to seek the inner guru." Like, I was like, oh, okay. Those are the instructions from my guru. Okay. He was able to take it like that, you know? And it kind of shows how willing we generally are to give away some of our power. Right? You know, and to sort of like not trust that there is this deep connection to spirit inside of ourselves, right? That there is this disconnect between the inner, and that on one level, it is good to have people who are masterful in some ways to point things out and to remove blockages and to love us unconditionally. But it doesn't seem like that is the end in of itself. Right? Is it the end in of it? And it can be for, I guess, some traditions, right? There are dual traditions where people really revel in that sort of relationship, that loving dual relationship. But to sort of kind of create, to kind of grow into that ourselves, to find our own innate potential and to allow that to emerge so that then we become that refuge for others, you know, I think is, you know, a process that we watched Ram Dass go through in some ways, to bring it back.
Yeah.
You know, to what extent he finished it, if it's ever finished, I don't know. But, you know, we watched the process of somebody who was very neurotic by his own definition, turn into somebody who was a refuge for others through a relationship to a guru and into his own heart that was that guru as well.
Page 7 of the cookbook says, "Guru, God, and self are one." Ramana Maharishi.
Oh, there you go.
Silence, and then there's another one. "Silence thy thoughts, and fix thy whole attention on thy master, whom thou dost not see, but whom thou feelest." And that's Madame Blavatsky, you know, who had a very, you know, master for her was a very specific person.
Right. There's a nice organic restaurant in Philadelphia that is in her old house.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, they're carbon neutral and everything.
That would be a good psychedelic Sangha pilgrimage.
It's, yeah, you know, if you were there doing something else, like it would be, it would be a good stop on a pilgrimage. I wouldn't go there just for that.
Yeah, Madame Blavatsky doesn't get us all the way there. We need to choreograph the pilgrimage. This should be something we do. We should do a kind of I was trying to think of like something we could do that had this kind of energy, you know, where like maybe we're all reading a page sequentially and like there's some, you know, kind of chain of people reading Ram Dass's book around the world, or maybe there's some kind of Ram Dass like pilgrimage we could do where Well, actually, we do a kind of Ram Dass pilgrimage. Last year, we did a pilgrimage to the Marsh Chapel on Good Friday to celebrate the Good Friday experiment.
Oh, nice.
And we're going to do it again this year. And it would be very timely to go visit some of the sites of Massachusetts that are associated with Ram Dass. Maybe, that house that is featured in that film where, his father's house, where he brought back all the hippies and.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure whoever's there now would have the same feeling that his father did initially. The on Haight Street, on Ashbury Street, right, the Grateful Dead house.
Yeah.
The owners have put up like a very pointy gate.
Yeah.
Like they really, because there's people there all the time, and they really don't want you sitting on the steps. Reading that photograph.
Sucks when your house is the pilgrimage site for hippies, right? Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe that's what, maybe it's lovely having people on your stoop every day,
right?
Celebrating.
It seems to suck for these people.
Yeah, I've been there. I've gotten the stink eye from the windows.
Right. So does anybody, it's like we've gone almost an hour and a half, and that feels pretty good. I would love, again, to offer to open it up to anybody who has, thoughts, questions, reflections, memories, experiences, or expletives. I don't know.
Ram Dass wants you. Oh, this is good. I'm going to read one. I saw that my whole game didn't work. It gave me all the rewards that seemed to be offered, but it didn't work. There was a place in me that knew it wasn't working. I knew there was something else, but I couldn't get to it. At that point, I gave up, and then I was ready for the next message. When I went through the doorway, I thought, wow, it isn't like I thought at all. I mean, if I'm going to spend my life manipulating this puny ego through a set of power games and sensual gratifications, what's the payoff? The end is that it's going to end anyway because it's all in time. And suddenly I dig in who I am at that moment when I'm stoned, high. I am out of time. I am out of space. But boy, does it feel valid. Does it feel real? It feels like the first real thing that's ever happened to me. Everything else has a certain hustle, like a quality to it, except my suffering. Wow. You really get a sense of like torture there and like, wrestling with something.
Right. I mean, it is torture. That's one of the things he says in the beginning of the cookbook. He uses the word predicament. It's like, what do we do about our predicament? Recognizing that we're all sort of caught in a place that is not exactly super comfortable for us. It's not exactly, we're not exactly where we want to be. And, what we end up doing to try and get out of it, like you said, is wrestle with our puny ego. Right? It's like with all of these, I wrestle with the puny ego to try and form it into something, and it's, the whole system is broken, right, until we start to cook it. Right.
I love that puny ego, because it's so counterintuitive. It's like you think of your ego as being this, thing that you can't shift, you can't move. It dominates your thinking, it dominates your dream. But they're calling it puny, in the sense that like if you actually do this thing and like go through the door and stick your finger at your ego, you're going to realize it was a shadow, right? Like. Mm-hmm. There's nothing there. That's the whole Buddhist trip, right? It's like you start looking for that puny ego or that big ego, and what you find is not only a puny ego, but there's nothing fucking there.
Right. And it's always funny, I do it all the time too. I always cringe when I hear myself talk about my ego, like I'm looking for my ego, I'm trying to do something about my ego, because I'm basically saying the ego's ego.
Yeah.
Right. It's you know, this different definition from just being like, oh, my ego is, I think I'm so great, to I think I'm anything at all. Like, I think I'm some sort of long-lasting character. And so kind of, you know, almost just allowing it to do whatever it wants because it's so puny. Like, what's the difference? And if I just sort of, like what?
I like a child, like in a way,
Yeah.
you know, like you kind of let them, you know, run around and you know, there's an understanding that it kind of needs to do that. You know, they gotta burn some, you know, energy but in the, you know, but if you can disassociate and sort of watch it, right? Like that's a lot of the beginning of the round pages, is that sort of sitting still and just watching it, you know, not suppressing it, not trying to control it, but just watching it, and maybe thinking of it as like a child, a puny little thing, you know.
Right, and developing it, you know, again, we're back to sadhana. Instead of manipulating it to be some sort of kind of master of the universe.
Right.
You know, because remember, that's what I remember from my reading is, it's a great servant and a lousy master. You know, if we teach it to love, serve, and remember, love, serve, devotion, you know, with sadhana practice, then there's probably going to be less disturbance around our predicament.
Mm-hmm.
So if people want to connect with the Psychedelic Sangha, is there anything happening? How do they connect with you guys? How do they support you?
Great. Yeah, actually, we have a lot going on. We have our New York stuff happening all the time, but I'm going to be actually in California in early January doing a talk at the Dharma Collective in San Francisco on the 4th.
Oh, cool.
And that's going to be, it's called Avant-Garde Buddhism, and I'm going to be talking a lot about the events that we do in New York that are called happenings, and they're very, you know, I bring this book actually to all our happenings and we read from it. It's a happening is very in line with what we've been talking about in terms of using performance art and sensory experience as a container for spiritual accomplishments. And so if people are in the New York area, we're doing these avant-garde Buddhist events probably every other month. We also do what we call darshans, which are anything from, you know, a lecture to a museum trip, but they're psychedelic in the sense that they're non-normal. You know, for some people that could mean literally taking a psychedelic. For other people, for a lot of people, it just means approaching things from a non-normal angle. So if we're doing a lecture, we might be doing a lecture in a park, and we might be meditating in a field, and we might be walking and experiencing something related to the topic. So there's, you know, it's not your traditional, conventional lecture. And then we also, you know, the sort of bedrock of what we do, not just here, but elsewhere, Montreal, San Francisco, a little bit, is the integration circle. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we've been talking a lot about integration, and you and I were talking yesterday, and I mentioned that we're putting together a Psychedelic Sangha book that's going to have an integration part of it that's based on what we've been doing in these integration circles, primarily here in New York, but also we're getting a lot of help from people like Eric Davis in San Francisco, who's a Psychedelic Sangha person and has developed meditations for meditating with psychedelics, and also integrating not just psychedelic experiences, but any mystical experience, anything. And it doesn't even have to be mystical. It's just something, what I would describe as sublime trauma, you know, like trauma that you wouldn't necessarily couch as the kind of trauma you don't want. You know, it's like there's something good about it, but then there's also the rub is that it's not easy to make sense of it. And so it has that sort of potential to traumatize your waking life. And so that's what integration is obviously all about. And that's really what we're about. You know, we're about setting up opportunities, community opportunities for people to meditate in unconventional ways, psychedelic ways, but also to integrate those experiences. So you can find out more about us if you're interested at our website, which is psychedelicsangha.org. And if you're in San Francisco on the 4th, we're going to be doing avant-garde Buddhism. We're going to look at videos from our happenings. We're going to be doing some of the kinds of things that Killian was talking about, those drama games that I think have a real spiritual import. So it's going to be very hands-on, more like a workshop than a talk.
That's great. Fantastic. I'll see you there.
All right.
And if you're not familiar with me, I work with Tam Integration. We're mostly in the North Bay. We do integration circles a couple of times a month. We're doing more and more of these online events. And coming up, we have an online event. We're doing a meditation intensive, psychedelic integration meditation intensive, 4 weeks of online live gatherings. I think we have somebody attending from Swaziland, which is cool, you know. Like we have somebody here from Poland today. It's like really nice to have extended worldwide community on the integration. And so that's on the website, tamintegration.com. We also recently released a online course, video course on how to have your own integration circle in your own town.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I get a lot. You know, people call me up and they're like, I'm in Topeka and there's nobody here and I need an integration circle. I wish somebody would do an integration circle. And it's like, well, you're somebody, you know, as the old Zen koan, you know.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what we have happening at, you know, online class, regular integration circles. Maybe we'll meet some people on the 4th that will, we can start working on having full-on happenings here in the city. And I thank you all for your attendance, and I wish you, you know, very, very happy holidays. Thank you for kind of sharing your love again with this person who has meant so much for us, for sort of showing up to honor Ram Dass's life and work. That's really,
My brother, Happy New
man.
Year.
Happy New Year, Killian.
Much success for you in everything that you do.
Oh my God, may you find true love and all your wildest dreams come true.
Thanks, brother.
That's good on camera, man.
It's almost like he knows how to perform.
Yeah.
All right, cool. There we go.
All right.
People are checking out.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for inviting me.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.